What is up, guys? My name is Samworld, and this is a complete guide to master Serum. Today we are going to be diving into the world of the warp section inside of Serum. Now the warp section, guys, is going to allow you to grab these wave shapes that we have inside of Serum. We've gone through a lot of them, like the spectral, the vowels, and it's going to allow us to change them up. It's going to change the way they look by utilizing the warps, and we're going to have different kind of warps which are each going to do different things. The warp section is great for adding movement to sounds, as well as using the FM section to create FM based sounds and doing a lot of crazy stuff with it, as you guys are going to see. The possibilities are endless as well with the remaps. So today we're going to be going into this and pretty much just talking about it, as well as making some sounds with it. Okay, so let's get started, guys. So here we kind of have a basic song. Boom, 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 ready to go. All right, guys, so the first one we have is the sync. Now the sync is going to be an analog effect. So if you're ever trying to emulate analog, you know, like the Moog Stuff 37, the Moog stuff, even the Prophets, a lot of them are going to have the sync feature in them. Now the sync inside of Serum isn't a traditional sync. It's more of an emulation of it. But traditionally what would happen is you would have a master oscillator or a master saw, let's just put it that way. And then you would have other oscillators, so other saws that would be considered slaves. Essentially, every time you shifted your master oscillator, the slaves would get re-triggered and they would have to change to what the master oscillator. Now the key thing is that the slaves, you can use different frequencies with them, and this will create different changes in the sync effect. This would give some really edgy sounds. A lot of the sync sounds are good for like hard techno, some dubstep ones. You could do a lot of cool stuff with it, and let's get straight into it. Now in Serum, as you go from left to right on the sync, you're going to see that you start to get more frequency out of the saw. What I mean by that is how many times it starts to appear. Essentially, when you see that happening in a wavetable, like you have a bunch of saws coming in, you should instantly think that it's going to sound a little bit in higher frequency, a bit brighter, and that is the effect that we get out of it. As you guys can see. Now, it's very easy to get out of key certain times with the sync, so you got to be careful with that. But usually, you know, if you can hear it and you can kind of get the tone out of it to where you want it, you can get some cool stuff with it. Now, one of the things you can use the sync for is obviously just a standard, you know, kind of like very analogish type of sound. If you add an LFO to that, you know, which you can to any warp, you can add modulation. And then if we add a bit of legato in this, you know, that's why I say it's really good for these kind of sounds. We don't have to push it all the way. We can have it maybe like around 11. It gives you a lot of good greedy bass lines. One way I would use this, for instance, is one of my favorite leads in G House, which from this group from Loach 21, where they have pretty much two saws. One of them is going to have a sync to it, and then we're going to run them through a filter LFO. We already know how to do this if you've been watching the series, and we'll have it set to envelope. And we're going to put this maybe up an octave. Yeah, so you can do a lot of cool stuff with it. You can do that. You know, here we can create some cool. You know, very simple sound design, but a lot of times the simpler stuff works best. But that's how we would use the sync. You can also use it for movement if you want. So we can kind of get rid of and just use like maybe a sine and just a simple slow, you know, just you can also use it for leads, maybe you know, if you want to do kind of like a pitchback effect or like a punchy effect. You know, you can modulate it in any way. Check out the movements if you like it, but that's going to be pretty much the sync. Now, we do have other versions of the sync, like the window 1.5, which is considered a windowed sync. And essentially what it's doing is at the end here, it's going to create this sort of kind of fade, and that just makes it sound a lot cleaner than the standard sync. You know, if we go window full, it's a little different. Okay, and what this is doing is just making it sound a little bit cleaner, because the sync, you're gonna have irregularities as you go from this guy to this guy. So that in essence, it's kind of preventing these kind of weird, you can see here we have the sign, it gets cut, and then we got to start back here. So it prevents those kind of irregularities. So it's a lot cleaner if you go with the windowed syncs. Now the next effect we have, guys, is a bend plus, which is gonna pretty much, as I call it, thin, make the whatever wavetable you have thin, or it's gonna push it inward, as you can see when it happens into a saw. If we see it on a crush wub, it kind of pulls in. It's kind of like a black hole. Now, bend plus and all these are going to be cool if you just want to get more out of the wavetable. Let's say you want to turn it into this wavetable to sound more deep throat. You know, it's good for that. However, majority of the time, these guys are good for movement. A lot of times, if you want to add more movement to your sound, or you want to make it sound more alive, you can add cool little decay effects, modulations to it. If I kind of get rid of that, look how boring that sounds. So bend plus, bend minus, the ASIMs are going to be good for that, but we're still going to talk about them. But bend plus is like the black hole effect. It's going to kind of pull in, and with a saw, it just makes it a lot thinner, as you guys saw. With a sine, you can see it kind of pushes it in. But again, it's super fun. Okay, so that's going to be the bend plus. Now, the next one we have is the bend minus. So the bend minus is the opposite. It makes the saw fat. It squares it out a bit more, which is good if you want a heavy saw rather than the kind of like a natural sounding saw. So this is something more that would sound a lot more analog if you have a bend minus up, because when you have like a Moog Sub 37 and you play that saw, it's kind of like it has a bit more subbiness to it than the traditional Serum one. So it's good for emulating that kind of stuff. So here we can have that. We can do two of those guys, fine tune a bit. And then we can just run this through here. Once we have that, you know, I have this MIDI here from this last sound design stream I had. Let's add another saw with the sub here just to... If I lower this down, you lose a lot of that body, a lot of that. So that's a good way to use the bend minus. And again, you can also use it for movement. Okay, now the next effect we have is the bend again, bend plus and minus. So at the center, it's doing nothing, but if you move to the right, it gets fat. If you move to the left, it makes it thin. With other wavetables like the crush wub, again, it would just be the black hole effect versus the bomb effect, where it pushes everything like something blew up in the middle and it's like... But again, these are good for movement. So if you're doing kind of like bass house or something like that, you can also use those to add a bit more movement. There's a start. Okay, so you can do a lot of cool stuff like that, add movement to your sound. Next one we have is the PWM, which is another analog effect. So if you're trying to emulate analog, you're making techno one now, these are sync and PWM are good effects to kind of explore when you're creating like a basic saw. For instance, the PWM, what it's going to do is pretty much going to push the saw all the way to the left into the corner. What this creates is an effect which makes the saw a lot thinner sounding, until you have no more because you literally killed it. However, this effect is useful mainly for squares. The square is one of the PWMs that you're going to have most, and it sounds the best with it. In traditional analog, usually the square would be the only one that would get PWM'd. That just means pulse width modulation, so we would just push it. And that's why when you move from left to right here, you see like this starts to move to the right, so that's the pulse width version of the square. This is good for literally modulating. This mono legato. If I get rid of that, you can do a lot of cool stuff with the PWM, but all you really need to do is that it pushes stuff in, and a lot of times it makes it sound a lot thinner, but you can use it again to add movement like we did with the other sounds, okay? Moving along, we have the ASIM. As you can see, it shifts that to the left, and it's going to do the same for our, other waveforms. Let's say we have, a weird one like, I don't know, like a W Tech. It's going to push from the center to the right, or sorry, to the left. So you can see. Again, it's changing the way the waveform looks. That's going to be the asym minus, and then the asym plus and asym minus is the same as the bend minus and bend plus in the sense that you have both at your disposal. At the center, there's nothing happening. But if you move to the left, you move to the left, you move to the right, you move to the right. You can kind of get the idea there. Next, we have a flip, which is going to be a phase inversion of the waveform. So it's just shifted, as you can see. I mean, it sounds cool. If you like that, that's it. I rarely use this one. However, I find it the transition is just too rough. So I don't find myself using it unless I want to inverse the wavetable that I have. Okay. Next one we have is a mirror mode. So what you're getting essentially is going to be, let's put this to center there. Essentially what's happening is you're kind of grabbing your wavetable and then you're duplicating it and you're shifting it like that. And you have two of them. Now, if you guys remember what I said about the sync, the more frequency you have of that sound, the higher pitch it's going to sound. Well, that's what happens here as well. But this one's really cool. Again, this one is a dope one to add for movement. Again, dubstep bass lines, you're going to be doing that. You can add those and it'll sound great. Whatever you want to do with it. The mirror is a good one to have. Just keep in mind that it does give you some higher frequencies out of that wavetable as it's duplicating it, and then you're shifting back and forth between them. You're kind of shifting the phase of it. Okay, next ones we have are the remaps. Now, the remaps are very interesting. First off, remap, you're going to get that pencil button or a magnifying glass used to get that. But essentially what you're doing is you're wave shaping the wavetable. So if I start to move this and I increase the remap, you can see that it starts to shift the wavetable to whatever input I set on this. Now, I'm not gonna lie, if I told you guys here what I'm doing with this, essentially I wouldn't be able to say. It just changes away from, but what I've done for myself is that if you go into Isotope Trash 2 or FL Studio's Wave Shaper and it has some presets on the way they wave shape, you can copy those as I did for the shaper, and then I use those to kind of shape this differently. So this kind of waveform here, as you can see that I copied, pretty much turns this into a square because it has a square outline to it. But then it has these little knobs here that I've added, similar to what Ozone Trash 2 had for a certain distortion. And it gives it a bit of ridges on the square. So it makes this a square, but it sounds a lot dirtier, a little bit more, I want to say, bit crush. Let's get rid of the reverb. I switch between those. I have one called Ranger, or that's the one we used. I have one called Nasty Girl. Now the cool thing with this is once you have the remap, the transition, the crossfade is pretty smooth, so you can definitely use it like. So here I have a couple presets, and I recommend you guys. Let's switch this up. You also don't need to modulate it, you can just use it. So it's up to you guys to decide, but that's just what that's going to do. Now, as we move next one, we have a Quantize, and the Quantize feature is just a bit crusher. It's degrading the quality of your sound. It's really squaring it. It's similar to using the sample and hold filter or the downsample distortion that we talked about in previous episodes. Now, the next feature is going to be one of the ones you're going to use a lot. It's the FM section inside of Serum. Now, FM stands for frequency modulation. Essentially, what you have is you're going to have a saw. Let's say this is the one I have, and you're going to have this saw going into this sine wave. Now, essentially, however the saw sounds, however fast it's going, what frequency it's at, how many octaves it has, it's going to change this sound. It's going to speed it up. It's going to slow it down, and that essentially creates the FM modulation. So, as I go from left to right, and I have just a simple saw set to 0, you can see you start to hear more of a saw influence. Now, we can also go into menu and render oscillator A-warp, and then you can see what actually happened to the wave. So as we bring in that saw, you can see that the frequency, there we go, there it is. The frequency of the sine pretty much sped up. So now we have like 1, 2, 3 sines. You have a little bit of a saw there, so that's where that buzziness comes from. So that's what's happening essentially to the wavetable. You don't get to see it with FM though. I think it would take up too many resources, but that's essentially what we are doing. So the traditional way of using FM, honestly, is more using sine to sine, and then you can switch it up if you want, but the sine to sine FM is the cleanest one that you can get. So if we go FM from B here from the sine, we're starting to add those harmonics, and that's how it's going to sound like. Okay, you can also LFO that. So a lot of times you're going to be able to do that kind of stuff to it. Now, the other important thing, like I said, whatever this sounds like will alter the way this sounds like. So you can increase the octave by what? Let's lower this down a bit. We can go up one more. You get to get more mid-lows, more higher harmonics, the higher it goes. Let's put a filter. Sounds pretty cool, as you guys can see. But one thing that you should note, we do lose a bit of low end with those. So anytime you have anything like that, you do want to add a sub, so you get your low end back, especially when using high FM ratios. That's what that's called, having a 0 to 3. That's a 1 to 3 ratio, I believe, or 1, 2, 3. Yeah. So you have 1 to 3. You lose a lot of low ends, but you get higher harmonics. That's the trade-off. Now, again, like I said, you can switch this to any wavetable you want, and it will alter the way that sounds. You can also use the perfect 7th or the perfect 5th, sorry. And you can get different cool stuff, even weird semitone. Okay. Other things you can do with FM is create bell style sounds or electronic keyboard sounds. I guess that would be a way of saying it. So if I use a high FM and I don't have anything like that, we don't want that. Let's make this 0. A little less. I can run a filter through it, do a bit of subtractive synthesis like we already know how to do, and get some really nice bell style sounds, a bit more reverb. You can get a lot of like pleasing sounds with it as well. You just got to put in the work with the filter, because sometimes we can get this to sound a bit too rough. Okay, so kind of electric keys there. So that's going to be FM, guys. Now, the last two modulations that we have kind of from FM is going to be AM and RM. Now, I'm going to be honest, guys. These guys are a bit iffy for me to really understand, especially how it works inside of Serum. When you read the Serum manual, it has no real explanation other than its amplitude modulation and ring modulation. Now, amplitude modulation, literally, it's going to be the amplitude of something, and you can think of that as the volume of something. So when we have, let's say, like a saw here, and we have this amplitude modulation on, it's going to have to do with the volume of this guy, the amplitude of it. It's going to modulate that. I rarely use it in my sound design, but it's good for making bell style sounds as well again. Now, essentially what I should be doing is modulating the volume of this guy up and down, but I can't do that because then we obviously are going to have it playing inside of Serum. So that's why I'm a bit confused about it. You know, essentially with AM, you could do a bit of tremolo effects with it. But this AM sounds a bit different, like it's kind of bringing this wave into this one and creating like a separate sound. But that's how you would use that guy. And then we're going to have the ring modulation. Now, ring modulation, guys, is going to be pretty much a sine wave, and then you're going to have a carrier like a saw, let's say, or a square or another sine. And as you input it in, essentially the traditional way, it would multiply the sine wave. So by multiple. Here, however, it doesn't work in that sense, because usually a ring modulation will give you stuff that's inharmonic that doesn't really seem to have a key to it. However, here you do have a key to it, but as you see, if we put a saw in, it just adds those characteristics as if the sine was turning into a saw. So if I do this and I resample to oscillator A, you're going to see the way that it shifts it. I guess it does multiply it in a way, but it doesn't really give a traditional ring modulation effect. You're better off utilizing the ring modulation found in the mix section of the filter section of Serum. And then the last ones we have, guys, is just FM from the noise section and FM from the sub section. So this is useful. Let's say that if you want to FM this guy from this guy here, and then you want to do like 3 FMs. So then we can have this. So then we have two carriers, and then we have the main output here. So this guy, you can modulate this guy with this guy, and then you can modulate the saw from this guy that has been modulated. So you essentially can create a longer chain in your FM synthesis with this section here, in the FM sub or the noise. But that is going to be all the warp section, guys. So hopefully you have an idea on how to use them in your sound design. Hopefully now they've been demystified and you can go in and go like, I want this. I know what warp I want to go for. And hopefully you understand that they're there to really give you more out of the wavetables that you have. You can change them. You can do a lot of cool stuff. And eventually we're going to get into how to make wavetables, as if you've seen a lot of the cymatics packs, and I keep bringing them up in this series, but it's just that they've been heavily when it comes, they're like well known when it comes to Serum. They create a lot of wavetables for it and all that. A lot of the wavetables that they create come from the warps. Pretty much you can add like a mirror mode to something. You can save that and do some cool stuff, as I'm going to show you in upcoming videos. However, I've made a video on this already on how to make wavetables inside of Serum, which you can check out if you want to skip and you want to do that yourself. But other than that, guys, you guys take care. You guys have an amazing day, and then I'll see you guys next time for the other complete guide to master Serum. As next episode, we're going to get into more of the intricacies of Serum, like the matrix, global section, the voicing, which I've been using here and there, as well as the mods and vice versa. You guys take care and peace out.